like a real true bite mark, you know.
Okay, from now on, anything is on the record.
Sorry I had to cancel a few times. My mouse pad broke last week, and I had to get my great aunt some diabetes shoes, and
You know what, Zach, it's no problem.
Let's get right into it. I'm here today with Mr. Greg Coleman, the Interim Operations Commissioner of the University of Ottawa Students' Union, for an exclusive tell-all interview. Greg, can you start with a bit of an introduction? Where are you from?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Greg. I originally am from Connecticut, but I was in Ottawa studying for quite some time now. Just finished my degree in December. And while I'm the Interim Operations Commissioner, I'm about to complete a full term here at UOSU.
That's a bit of a rarity here at UOSU these days, I hear.
Completing a full term, yeah, Delphine's about to do it, God willing. But no, we've had a lot of ins and outs, and the team's been a little bit of a revolving door.
So you hit the executive, I say hit as if you hit it like a baseball, but you joined the executive committee at a bit of an odd point in the cycle where Delphine had already completed essentially a half term and she kind of had her staff in place already. How was that transition when you're joining a team that's already kind of assembled and you're kind of like, you have a fairly big role as the operations commissioner handling, the budgetary side of things and everything that goes along with that. How was that experience?
Well, I think, truthfully, it wasn't just me transitioning. We also had a new advocacy commissioner who was hired, newly elected Francophone Affairs Commissioner at the time. And so all of us were coming in and kind of meeting Delphine's team as it was established. It's true that she hired the executive director. She did a lot of budget consultation. But it wasn't the only new person. I think that gave me some confidence to say that there were others and they're learning as well. But I think that it's true that she had a vision. That's what she was elected on in the previous November. So when she was re-elected to continue her term on May 1st, she didn't drop that vision. She was bringing us into it.
And you mentioned budget, and we'll talk about budget eventually, because I do think that's one of the biggest news stories of the year. But before, you weren't a member of even the board of directors before you was. You weren't an employee of its services. How was the experience like? Obviously, there's the job part of the role, and your duties that come with that. But then you're also put into this kind of political playpen at the UOSU board of directors. Like, how was that experience navigating, a political
playpen?
Yeah, I don't know how else to put it.
Well, this is interesting. There is a underreported truth, which is that I did run for board of directors in 2022.
I didn't want to bring that up, but I did.
Well,
know that.
But I think that it signals that I had a curiosity about UOSU, about campus life and our services before. I'd obviously used the services. I'd attended, I think the first Pride prom I attended, for example, and I was familiar with the services. I was part of clubs, and so I had a respect for the institution. And the board of directors is interesting. And when I ran for board, and this is the real contrast, I think, in my understanding of UOSU. When I ran for board in 2022, I saw it very much as a political place. You run for board in the same way you run to be, an MP. You have like a very political campaign. You stand for certain values. But when I became an executive, I realized that this is not Parliament. This is a nonprofit corporation. You have revenue, you have services to provide, you have members that have a stake in things, and you have the board of directors, which are members who are elevated to the role and responsibility of making broader organizational decisions. And so when I spoke to the board, I didn't speak to the board the way I might have spoken to it if I was elected in 2022 with these, values and this platform, but I spoke to them as someone who is essentially CFO of UOSU. We have a mission, we have services to provide, we have a budget. These are constraints, but they are also opportunities, and we need to pull back a little bit from the messaging and lean more into the real provision of services.
So yeah, and you talk about the mandate of UOSU being different than that of a provincial or federal government. With that in mind, and everybody loves to bring out the low turnout, having only a 10% mandate or an 8% mandate. Does that worry you as much as if it were a provincial government that has mandate over healthcare or education, stuff like that? I mean, we know that there is student unions out there like Western and Queens that generally see much higher engagement. Where do you think we go from here? Where's an ideal engagement number that you expect or you hope UOSU would reach within the next few years if things keep going well?
Yeah, I think American politicians, particularly on the right, they have this phrase they like, whenever they're about to say something, they say, I'm not an economist. Ironically, I'm not a political scientist and I'm not a communications student, but I am an economist. And so the turnout trouble that has been on this campus for a while, even in the SFUO days, it was only at the end of SFUO, the fall, where people started to listen up because the student union was in true peril. But the turnout problem has never made sense to me, because it seems to me that every student has, even if you don't have, I think there are high barriers to entry to become an executive or a director, but in terms of voting, which I think is still a very powerful instrument, there's a low barrier to using one's right to vote or to taking part in some of the consultations. And so when 10% of students want to click through an email and vote on something, I don't really understand that problem. And I think when people say, okay, well, UOSU's not operating with a strong mandate, I have to say, well, look, we have offered as many times as we can people to kind of come on board, have an opinion, vote. There were competitive elections for different visions, for president, for Francophone Affairs, certainly for the directorship roles, especially at the FSS this past session. And so there were options, and for people to choose the option to not pick, like the famous Canadian band Rush, I think, sang about one time, it doesn't make sense to me. I think it's a wasted opportunity. And so I don't feel, when I do UOSU work, I don't feel that we don't have a mandate. I say, well, everyone that we have asked who had the interest, the patience, the commitment to respond, to vote, they have explained, what they have voted, they have spoken. And that, I think, is our mandate.
Mm. And moving on, so we talked about the governance side, and I want to touch on probably, in my eyes, the two biggest news stories and the two biggest issues that UOSU has dealt with this year, which has been A, the budget cuts, and B, OC Transpo. So I'll start with the budget cuts. You joined before that process started, or midway through that process?
So the budget
cuts were already decided.
Well, not the specific cuts.
Right, that's right. The 11% or whatever it was.
The fee reduction was voted on.
Right, and then you joined at what point in that process?
So the fee reduction was voted on at the same time, I believe, that Delphine became president, right? Mm-hmm. And so this was a revenue reduction across the board, and the next budget to be submitted was 2024, 2025. I came in May 6th, I believe, so the week after, basically, once the new board sat and could put me in office. I came in that day, and Delphine had done pre-budget consultation with kind of a very jury general surveys and meetings and things, and with roundtables and with previous directors, RSG presidents. So I can't speak to the depth of that, but I came in knowing that there was some consultation done. Not to mention that everyone on the board, again, these are elected people, and so what hadn't been decided was where we were going to fill the kind of hole created by the revenue loss. And that is where myself and the president sat down, we worked, and we created a budget that tried to prioritize what was important to us, student jobs, essential services, but had to make unfortunate cuts in other places. And so, but the budget cuts, I do take responsibility for the budget cuts, because I am the one who chairs Finance Committee. I sat there and I said, this is the budget we're bringing to board.
So, of course, yeah, and with again, I can't remember the number, 11%, obviously there was unfortunate cuts to be made. In terms of UOSU, what can be learned, A, as a student, and what can be learned as a board? So as a board, when you're going through with these budget cuts, but B, as a student, when you look at all the cuts that happened, does that not, do you think that should make a student look and go, hey, maybe I should have turned out to vote if I didn't want things to be cut?
I actually don't see it as like karma, like, oh, you didn't vote, so therefore things got cut. I sort of see it the other way around, that students who did vote in November of that 2023 gave UOSU a mandate to lower fees. And so, because really when sure, there are people who are upset about the cuts, but there were also people who are upset about just the cost of the UOSU fee. And so these are kind of competing visions, right? Do you want more services? Do you want less services? And so it was not, necessarily given in November what way that was going to swing. And the folks who organized for a lower UOSU fee, they won the day there. And, since then we've seen more referendums that are based on specific fees, and we've seen that opinion fleshed out. Okay, you want a lower general UOSU fee, but you want more for advocacy, but you don't necessarily want more for Francophone services as they voted in the most recent elections. And so that has been the signaling. I don't want to say it's karmic, but I want to say it is proof when people say UOSU has no mandate, UOSU has no mandate. Well, the folks who turned out in November 2023, those were the voters who gave us a mandate. It was out of my hands at that point to say, oh no, I actually want to spend more money. No, I could not spend more money because the revenue had been cut.
And moving on to OC Transpo, and something that's not really part of the UOSU's budget, because if it was, it would probably multiply it by a rate of 6 times or something like that. But we're all familiar with the history of what the city is trying to do. So I'm going to ask you a bit more of an opinion question. Is the future of the UPass in peril if the city decides to continue making students who make up about 20% of the program's budget continue bilking them for every dollar that they're worth? I mean, there's students, of course, that use a UPass and use it a lot. There's other students that go on the train once every couple months. Right. And those are the students that if it comes time for a referendum, they're going to say, no, I want out. So how do we avoid that referendum, but B, how do we fight back against the city here?
Well, I think, Andrew, if there's a theme of this interview, it is that those who show up, those who share their opinions, those who organize, it is not because of my unfairness, but it is because of the just volume of those people that decisions are made. And it's not just me, I'm here for a year and I will go, right? But there will be many other decision makers, not just at UOSU, but at the university, in provincial and federal government. This is kind of the training ground for how do I get my voice heard, which I think is important for any citizen. So this is not this is not a discriminatory opinion. I think it is my responsibility as well. With the OSU Transpo agreement, it, like many of our other agreements with for services we provide for our relationship with the university, it is a contract that specifies the responsibilities of the parties. And so it was one that was ratified by the students by a referendum. And so I think there are competing visions of the UPass. I was someone who probably used their UPass to the point where OC Transpo wasn't making any money on it, but others it's not that case. And so whatever you believe about the OC Transpo UPass, whatever is going to be possibly renegotiated, that agreement, I believe it allows with a certain notice period, either any of the parties to step out. If that's the case and something new is renegotiated, there will be a vote, there will be a referendum, and if people felt that they weren't heard those other times, it is time to get your friends, the friends who don't vote, the friends who don't know what UOSU stands for, to talk to them, whatever you believe, and say, you really do need to vote on this, because it's the difference between me getting to class at an affordable rate every day because I use the train every day, or it's the difference between us spending money that we don't need to pay because we live in Sandy Hill and we take a walk every day.
Also, I'm going to parlay here now into something a little more big picture than OC Transpo, and that is the big, massive hunk of concrete that is Jacques Turcot. We've chatted about this before. At some point between when it was built in 1965, 1970?
More like, I think it was built in the 70s.
Built in the 70s, okay.
But conceived.
As most good things are, conceived in the 60s. Built of concrete.
I haven't met the Wilimeks. But
well, my mother was born in the 60s, so if she's watching this, she'll be very happy. Anyways, it was built then, and at some point, its ownership or its management rights were transferred from the SFUO to the university and kind of cut out the middleman that was UOSU. Am I getting that?
Okay, I think you're mixing a lot of the acronyms here, because first off, there is no time where SFUO and UOSU really exist at the same time.
Right, no, I just mean more that it transferred from SFUO to the university.
This is something where I don't have a specific agreement, which is why I talked to you earlier when I was talking about the archives. I don't have a specific agreement in hand. I don't know the entire history. But I think that there is something to be said, regardless of the history and what Jacques Turcot specifically did with the conception and future building after his passing of the UCU. I think there is something to be said about the university having an interest in collaboration with those in kind of in the UCU, whether it's our services, whether it's the students that are there, whether it's the UOSU kind of as a representative of the students. I mean, it's called the University Center. So it ought to be controlled, I think, in some part by those who are here and make the university what it is, and it's not just the professors. And so I'd love to know more about the history of that building, because I believe there is some very public information that says that it was actually a collaborative project. And so I understand there's kind of a legal side to it, but I think that a much clearer sort of moral, social thing is that, if the UCU becomes a place that is, rented to RBC and not really given to students, I don't think that's a long-term growth strategy.
So that's part of a bigger question, and that's kind of when you're in negotiations between two parties, the one that has the institutional knowledge and has been at the table longer, like the administration, is usually going to have the upper hand over the one that is re-elected every couple years, or every year, or every 6 months, is made up of students. In June, that's changing. Now, with a new president, now I know that there's still lots of people remaining in the administration. Now with a new president, UOSU on a voter turnout trend line up, on getting over the initial bumps and bruises of a student union. Do you feel that UOSU is well positioned when we see that new president enter into some healthy negotiations that maybe have or have not been there?
I certainly think that the president's going in with a unique perspective, having been the deputy to the president. This person has had maybe next to only me and the executive director, who obviously isn't a student, has had the closest kind of front seat vision of what it looks like to talk to the university. So I think that's a great start. But going back to your big picture thing, I think that folks are just fed up, because this is not just a question of the UCU and Ottawa and UOSU. I mean, it's a question of the province of Ontario funding its universities. It's a question of the federal government turning off the taps on international students, which were sort of the infinite money glitch. They were sort of this way for universities to just keep funding things without planning, I think, in some ways. And so the blame game could go on forever. Do you blame the province, the feds, the university itself?
The student union.
The student union. Well, in some ways, did the student union squander this time, But I think I'm someone who believes in small, how do I say this? Small town politics in a way, or small, I don't want to say low level, but bite-sized politics. And I think what we can do, looking up, is we have a president who has really studied the playbook of, I think, one of our most successful presidents, Delphine, and he's going in with knowledge that a new face would not have had. And he's going in, and the other thing is, I'm going to be retiring from UOSU, but he's also going in with great connections to those who have preceded him. We also have great full-time staff there that have really learned a lot. I think we're in the best negotiating position we can be, but I think, again, if I'm speaking to folks who maybe are not part of that 10% who voted, it's not just UOSU. You got to go out. I hope you voted in the Ontario election if you could, and in this spring or summer, you got to do it again, because you have to send a message, a consistent message across every facet of your life, that this is what I value. This is what I'm engaged to, and this is who, you are willing to go out and spend that time, get in line to vote, because you know that the benefits are going to ripple out.
And I'm gonna leave you off on this one. This is a bit more of an easier question, maybe a change up. Well, not even a change up, because sometimes those are tricky, but and there's going to be a lot of cuts in this video.
I imagine you speak quite fast.
I do. I mumble.
It's not the Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey.
You grew up in Connecticut.
Yeah.
How in the hell did you learn French in Connecticut to a level where you were somewhat fluently bilingual in Canada?
When I made my first friends in Quebec, I told them there's this kind of funny, well, I think anyone from Quebec will know what I'm talking about, but I think many Canadians as well. There's Le Chemin Roxham, which is like a kind of Canada's weak spot in the border, you might say. And I always said, I had a joke with my roommate, I'd say, Le Chemin Roxham for a geographer is actually where the Connecticut River meets the St. Lawrence River. And not that I'm an illegal immigrant, but like, but you know, I think like for me, I don't know, I've kind of had an infatuation with the North. And as for the French, I took French classes in high school. I had a teacher who was actually descended from Quebecois, like folks that were Quebecois who moved to Connecticut. In fact, the center of Connecticut, specifically New Britain, has a lot of, ironically, has a lot of Quebecois kind of history. Folks who moved there. Actually, Connecticut, as a holiday, there is La Saint-Jean. It's not called that, but it is that day, happens to be a holiday in Connecticut as well. But I liked the language, and I liked kind of, you know, the Canadian compromise of it's a North American country. It still has that like the freedom, the wide open spaces that you associate with North America, but it also kind of has a different outlook on things in the U.S. in terms of like what the values are, you know, how competitive life is. So I came up here for an opportunity to continue to practice my French. I also came up here to save some good money on university because education's valued in this country in a different way. And I came here and I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I'd be going back. And then what happened is I made a lot of friends that taught me a lot of things. And now I kind of see myself as being part of the Canadian experiment. And you know, I still have an appreciation for the United States, but I think it's a country where the fighting is starting to get a little out of control, and I think that we have some lessons to learn about what, you know, we need to value and what it means to really keep building a multi, you know, how do I say this, a diverse tapestry of people.
Well, we're happy to have you on our side during a rematch for the War of 1812. The winning side. Let me just.
Winning side.
I think I had. Those are all my questions. But if there's anything else you wanted to.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
I think we hit the big ones at least.
The big ones. What I will say, maybe, because I am here, I'm in the rare opportunity to talk to a Ottawa journalist. I think like my message to the Fulcrum and the Rotund and anyone else doing any sort of independent journalism on campus is that. You are in that equation for engagement and turnout. So, you know, if the elections are going on, if there's a debate and the debate is not, you know, engaging, or if the reporting is kind of late, tired, unprioritized, you know, sure, students can find out about things other ways, but that's...
You have to make them care about it.
You have to make them care about it, and they are paying you, what is it, like $4
a semester, yeah.
To try to know what's going on around here.
That's a good message, because some people don't believe in that. So, and I certainly do myself. You know, I'll be leaving here in, you know, a similar timeline as you, but I do hope that the future generations continue on the kind of the spirit of debate that the Fulcrum has stoked over the past couple of years.
Thanks for the interview, and thanks for letting me shoot my show here all these years.
You've been shooting these shows here in the diplomatic room? Who gave you permission to do that?
Bush.
Seriously?